John Carpenter might just be the most criminally underappreciated filmmaker of his time. While today revered as the master of horror, the man who brought to life such indelible genre classics like Halloween and The Thing, contemporary audiences and critics were not so kind, at least in the United States. Assault on Precinct 13 landed pretty well in the UK, and Carpenter continued to be received more warmly in Europe as his career progressed. However, outside of Halloween, Escape from New York, and Starman, Carpenter's films largely fell on deaf ears in the US. The Fog was branded a schlocky step back from Halloween. The Thing went down as a critical and commercial failure, and no one really got Big Trouble in Little China, which I'm on record as saying is my favorite film of all time. I love John Carpenter. But getting away from my indulgent favorite talk for a second, the same reception was also given for Prince of Darkness and In the Mouth of Madness, two mid-career masterpieces among the many others in Carpenter's filmography that failed to make a splash at the box office or with mainstream critics. Indeed, those two films can count themselves among a couple of others by the director that are really still yet to be appreciated as much as they should be. Time has led to reappraisals of The Thing and They Live, which are both cult darlings and genre touchstones now, but movement on canonizing the likes of Christine and the two remaining efforts in Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy has been somewhat sluggish. Genre stalwarts will know what he was cucking with these pictures, the latter two specifically featuring what might just be the most compelling imagery in Carpenter's entire career. But they haven't gone mainstream, and for the most part, the 90s are seen as a decade of decline for the filmmaker on a critical level. That decade brought us the likes of Village of the Damned, Vampires, and Memoirs of an Invisible Man, all of which kind of have middling reputations even among the Carpenter faithful, despite the writer, director, and composer looking back fondly on the period. Speaking to NME in 2022, Carpenter had this to say about that specific era of his career. Quote, "I look back and I'm very proud of those movies I made and think it's some of my best work. But there is a problem of arriving at the wrong time and the audience is in a different mood. Audiences, I've discovered, do not like uncertainty." While there is very much a prevailing sense with Carpenter that he was just way too ahead of the curve, a filmmaker whose textual instincts proved out of step with audiences of the day, but which were vindicated steadily over time, that same rationale hasn't really been applied to his 90s era quite so liberally. This to me is a huge shame, particularly since there is one film of his that remains widely disregarded, the only sequel Carpenter ever directed, and one he himself professes is better than the original. I'm of course talking about 1996's Escape from LA. Co-written with star and longtime collaborator Kurt Russell and Deborah Hill, Escape from LA is often seen as something of a tonal departure compared to its predecessor, 1981's Escape from New York. That film, a suffusion of post-Nixonian anxieties regarding law and order politics and the neo-conservative resurgence of the Reagan era, is a cult staple, one that transformed Kurt Russell from a Disney starlet into an action heavyweight. It was gritty, pulpy, but also fun. A prime example of Carpenter's innate ability to conjure immortal imagery, and also reach directly into my brain and give me exactly what I want the most, which in that film's case was Lee Van Cleef wearing a cute little earring. Dude looks so cool. Now, regardless of my own personal opinions of the film, which I like but isn't in my personal top 5 Carpenter, just for the record, Escape from New York was a big success and has since been canonized as one of the director's greatest ever works. The same, however, cannot be said for its sequel, which premiered 15 years later and failed to receive much love from critics or audiences at the time, or really since. It currently holds a 54% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes and a 2.9 average on Letterboxd, with consensus today largely painting it as another step in Carpenter's perceived decline as a filmmaker, being followed by Vampires and Ghosts of Mars a few years later, and then The Ward in 2010, after which he stuck to composing music and living his best life playing video games and watching basketball. But Escape from LA also does all the stuff that New York does, just sadly minus a Lee Van Cleef. It's got the social commentary, this time aimed at the rise of the evangelical right and Hollywood artifice. It's got the cool factor, it's got the music, whether that's the Rob Zombie fronted soundtrack or the score co-composed between Carpenter and Shirley Walker, and it's got a killer cast of character actors. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that I agree with the master when he says that LA, a film that sees Snake tasked with averting an invasion of the United States by securing a lost doomsday weapon, does a lot of things better than New York. So, why is it still thought of so less fondly than its predecessor? Now, the general perception with Escape from LA is that it's a kitschy downgrade from New York. High on schlock, more goofy, and less immaculately constructed, with shoddy CGI failing to compete with the less digital, more practical work on display in Carpenter's original film. While I will concede that the effects don't always hold up, their shortcomings feel exaggerated next to the myriad things the film does well, particularly as it pertains to the technicality of its action set pieces, which is some of the best in Carpenter's entire filmography next to Big Trouble in Little China, its overall cast of characters, and its political through line. So much is made of this film as this goofy departure from the original, which, by the way, is deliberately pulpy too, but it's just as, if not more cutting. An affirmation of Carpenter's genre credentials, yes, but also a dystopian western suffused with horror and burning with apocalyptic fury. Contextualized that way, as a sort of postscript to Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy, which comprises The Thing, Prince of Darkness, and In the Mouth of Madness, films that, surprise, don't have much hope for humanity overall, and as a piece of prophetic satire regarding the rise of the religious right wing, Escape from LA occupies a salient place in Carpenter's filmography. He's indicated similar sentiments in interviews, saying in 2015 to Creative Screenwriting's Eric Bauer that it is, quote, better than the first movie. It's got more to it. It's more mature. You might think that's a weird thing to say in a film that features Snake surfing and shooting hoops to stave off execution, but he's right. As both a technical showcase and as a statement on where all of this is leading to, Escape from LA is a great film, and one whose shortcomings pale in comparison to its successes. Now, John Carpenter has never been one for sequels. He was infamously pressured into developing the script for Halloween 2, having gone on record multiple times to lament the alcohol-induced siblings twist that tied Laurie Strode and Michael Myers together, and had no involvement at a story level for any of the remaining entries in that series. Escape from LA is thus an anomaly within his filmography. As a sequel, he both co-wrote and directed, and it wasn't his idea to initially pursue it. Most of the momentum came from Russell, who by the mid-90s had carved out his own space within the action genre in between romantic assignments and the occasional thriller. He starred opposite Sylvester Stallone in the gloriously silly Tango and Cash, and captured hearts as Wyatt Earp in 1993's Tombstone, all the while distinguishing himself from his fellow 80s icons by embracing on-screen vulnerability. Russell was never afraid to be the butt of a joke in his films, or to just have fun, and it was these two aspects that most defined his action work, exemplified best by the self-deprecatingly heroic Jack Burton in Carpenter's Big Trouble in Little China. But Snake Plissken, by far his most iconic action persona, was a different beast altogether. While Escape from New York was pulpy entertainment, Snake was a gruff, Clint Eastwood-esque anti-hero without many redeeming qualities. He existed in a dystopia ravaged by war and fascism, and his main three priorities for much of that film were survival, sticking it to the man, and looking cool as hell doing it. As Snake, Russell had an instantly iconic visage. The long hair, the eye patch. As an exercise in aesthetics alone, Pliskin became an essential component of the 80s genre furniture. But as a part of Carpenter's nihilistic world, he took on another, more enduring quality. A statement of chaotic, self-preserved rebellion. A character who, in Russell's own words during a conversation with GQ, had a, quote, equal amount of psychosis and survivability. This dichotomy remained a defining feature when it came time for the sequel, which Russell shepherded alongside Carpenter and Hill as a writer, producer, and star. According to Carpenter, Russell, quote, rekindled his own love for the world of Escape from New York, now remade in the context of Russell the action star, a man who had mixed it with Sly and was set to embark on his most prolific stint within that genre by the time of LA's production. While Snake arrived very much as a fully formed creation, one that inspired giddy exchanges between director and star on the first day of filming Escape from New York, there was an altogether different off-screen context behind the Snake for LA, who by this point was an icon unto himself. Not quite on the Rambo scale, but certainly a cult favourite that had a legacy to not only be expanded, but acknowledged. This makes the shift to an LA setting almost ironic. The film spends plenty of time mocking, but also embracing the freakish nature of Tinseltown, of which Russell was now firmly established in, and that sense of escalation is both an adequate response to the change in setting, and its star's heightened exposure. Sequels are usually bigger and louder, but LA had the impetus for an absurd escalation across the board, in action, satire, and presentation, punctuated by a white zombie-fronted soundtrack and a rock-influenced score co-composed by Carpenter and Shirley Walker. That sense of brashness may prove abrasive to Escape from LA's critics, but the overall volume of the film I find to be stupidly entertaining, with Carpenter pulling off some of the most technically ambitious action set pieces of his entire career. These scenes overpower some notable shortcomings in the VFX department, which, to be honest, I find really charming, by sheer virtue of their concept and execution, outperforming New York's action across the board. Snake's first big action encounter has him attacking a convoy and jumping between multiple moving vehicles. He outsurfs a tsunami with a surfer dude Peter Fonda, mounts an attack via a hang glider, and, along the way, finds some time for a quick game of basketball. All this to me, on an objective scale, is cool as hell with a trademark, but just as importantly, it fits the change in setting. Snake snuck his way through New York and had to slither through decay. In Los Angeles, he can openly walk everywhere and is faced with the absurd more than he is the actively depressing. In other words, he fits in. Which brings me nicely to another reason why I love Escape from LA: the supporting cast. Escape from New York featured a terrific cast too, with Van Cleef, my beloved, Ernst Borgnine, Harry Dean Stanton, Donald Pleasance, and Adrienne Barbeau all filling out the scenery of that film wonderfully. But LA's is more entertaining and textually deeper. There's Pipeline, who I mentioned just before, a 60s counterculture relic surfboarder who comes to Snake's aid right as the big one hits. There's Maps to the Stars Eddie, a wonderful Steve Buscemi as a Hollywood loyalist selling delusion, and best of all, Bruce Campbell as the Surgeon General of Beverly Hills. Seriously, if there's one thing that goes against Escape from LA, is that it doesn't feature enough of this guy. Call it old hat or whatever for a film to go after cosmetic surgery like this, but as a potshot against Hollywood vanity and working class exploitation, the clients of the Surgeon General are all surgery-addicted faded celebs who take fresh organs from LA's impoverished. It's so over the top, it ends up working completely and utterly. Like, again, if I'm making one improvement to this film outside of the CGI, it's that I'm keeping the Surgeon General and his gang around as a secondary antagonist who chases Snake like the good old boys go after the Blues Brothers, because they're so much fun. But the supporting cast of Escape from LA obviously aren't just all there for laughs. Cliff Robertson's obscenely religious President Adam feels especially prescient as his character pertains to the growing influence of religious conservatism in American politics, while the idea of an island being used to house undesirable human beings has become real-world policy for several Western countries over the last 2 decades. The overall approach from Carpenter and Russell is totally eccentric, yeah, but it never encroaches on moments of pathos. The satire and overall political commentary remains fanged and sincere, which affords space for moments of pathos and redemption, encapsulated in the relationship between Snake and Valeria Golina's character of Taslima, a Muslim woman who was deported to Los Angeles because of her faith, and who opens Snake's eyes to the beauty of LA's dystopia. As she says in one of the film's few moments of quiet, quote, "If you think about what happens on the other side of the wall, that's the prison. This is the only free zone left." To which Snake replies, almost in an epiphanous fashion, "Dark paradise." Taslima is immediately killed following this exchange, but it illustrates a rare moment of vulnerability for Snake, who undoubtedly carries this encounter into the film's fittingly rebellious conclusion. In the Enemy interview with Carpenter I mentioned previously, author Martin Conterio described Escape from LA as, quote, "a libertarian's worst nightmare scenario delivered as a tongue-in-cheek reactionary blast of gonzo pulp fiction, which decides the island prison where chaos reigns is a lot better than the totalitarian state America has become." It's the perfect conclusion to draw from a film that marries Carpenter's nihilistic tendencies with Russell's libertarian streak, with Snake being positioned between a tyrant hiding disingenuously behind leftist rhetoric, Cuervo Jones, and a fascist religious presidency clawing desperately onto power. Mirroring the events of the first film, Snake enters a post-apocalyptic LA with survival on his mind, but emerges from it a changed man. Someone who found kinship among the freaks and undesirables. People who were, at their core, of a piece with him. For most of the film, and mirroring Escape from New York, Snake repeatedly tells everyone to call me Snake. He sees himself less as a human and more as an animal, a survivor, a coiled predator who could strike at any minute. At the end of New York, he tells Hawk to call him Pliskin, having again found common ground with the freaks who laid down their life for a chance at survival. It's an affirmation of his own humanity, and one to which LA provides the perfect thematic complement. When it comes time to surrender the Sword of Damocles system to his captors, headed up by Stacy Keach, instead of Call Me Snake, we get Call Me Pliskin, as the man who flew the Gulf Fire over Leningrad once again embraces his humanity and makes the conscious choice to end our failed experiment, activating the Doomsday weapon and rendering every electronic device across the globe completely useless. Through this act, Pliskin ensures our survival through our destruction, sending us all back to the Stone Age, before lighting a cigarette, moving towards the camera, looking us dead in the eye as he exhales and says, "Welcome to the human race." It's an all-timer mic drop of a conclusion credited to Russell himself, and one very much in step with the nihilistic tendencies of Carpenter's works. The world's broken? Well, let's fix it by breaking it some more. Ironically though, Escape from LA actually has more hope for humanity than the other films in Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy, and that it promises a new beginning, a second chance for us to not mess things up quite so terrifically. The post-apocalypse of LA thus takes on an Edenistic quality, a flawed anarchy that vomits up a coalition skilled enough to upset the tyranny of authoritarianism and provide our collective salvation. It's up to interpretation as to how sincerely or playfully the film entertains this idea, but the sheer fact it provides a route out for our current predicament makes it more hopeful than The Thing, Prince of Darkness, or In the Mouth of Madness, which, if you've seen, and you should have, well, you'll know how those films end. And that's not me saying Escape from LA is better than those films, because I don't think it is. I just think it's a little cool how it complements both them and Carpenter's own thoughts about our survival. Carpenter is on the record about how he's a, quote, short-term pessimist when it comes to the human race, which he summarized neatly to Bloody Disgusting in 2023. Quote, "Well, I'm a really big pessimist. I'm optimistic about mankind's survival in the sense that I want it to happen. What manages to survive, I don't want to go into that night, you know? I don't want to curl up and die. But, you know, I'm realistic, which makes me cynical. In that sense, Escape from LA could be viewed as the perfect method of satisfying those optimistic impulses. A fantasy of rebellion that, while very much about our destruction, also lingers on humanity's better qualities, encapsulated by Snake and those LA locals who help him on his journey. It's an imperfect beauty, but that's what makes it human. And that, more than anything, and especially right now in our current moment, is worth fighting for. So yeah, I love this film. Not as much as I love all those other Carpenter movies, but I do genuinely think it's great and should be freed from movie jail for the crime of being fun. So come on, open your heart to surfer dude Peter Fonda and that adorable CGI shark that tries to take a bite out of Snake at the very beginning. You might just find yourself having a great time. And that was our look back at Escape from LA. Do you think it's the one, or does it make you run, baby, run away? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and also what other films you'd like us to see cover on the Why You're Wrong series. We've covered Last Action Hero, Alien 3, Scooby-Doo, and have a bunch more lined up, so let me know what critical and box office bombs you'll always go to bat for are. That's all for now though. I've been Ewan, you've been watching What Culture, and if you'll excuse me, I've got a wave to catch. Ding 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 ding.